Marcus, you ready to roll?
Oh yeah, I'm always. I just
Feel
posting
like
to my it's social medias, We are
welcome,
back.
welcome everybody to
Get off.
Cultivating Excellence as Coxswains. We've had a lot of banter for the last 15 minutes. So I'm feeling the energy of the international coxswain community here. So we're excited to have this crowd. I'm Colleen Miller, and I'm manager of coach education and development at Rowing Canada. And I'm very thankful that we have our very own Kristen Kit, coxswain here, who has wrangled these two other international coxswains from Holland and from the USA. So I'll let Kristen introduce Peter and Marcus. But first of all, I'll introduce Kristen, and everybody should know Kristen if they don't already. Kristen has boxed for many years from St. Catharines, Ontario, and went to UBC. And also started in 2009 and is a medalist with the U23 women's crew, and also was a coxswain at the Paralympics with a medal in 2016 and medals at World Cup and World Championships with the senior women's team. So she's our go-to coxswain right now in Canada. And she is here to present. We have 45 minutes today. So it will be a long head race, but we will get through everything, and they're going to take us through the race. And please, everyone, we have our Q&A. So if you have questions throughout, please post them there, and we will do our best to answer them amongst the group. We may not get to all the questions, but please post them anyway. And if we go a bit over the 45-minute mark, that is okay. The recording following this will be on our Rowing Canada website under COVID-19 videos, and you will have opportunity for feedback following the webinar. So a survey will be sent out to you. So thank you everybody for attending today, and I will hand it over to Kristen.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Colleen. I really appreciate it. So I want to introduce to you to everyone, to firstly Marcus. Marcus McElhenney, he's the guy in the USA Olympic team polo. Just give us a wave, Marcus. So Marcus, we're really lucky to have him today. He is a 6-time world medalist, 3-time world champion, and an Olympic bronze medalist from Philadelphia. Prior to his successful career on the US national team, he was actually also a student at Temple University in Philadelphia. Marcus realized the need for coxswain education and developed an in-depth, bespoke curriculum using an experiential education model. To this day, when you ask Marcus what he enjoys most about being a coxswain coach, he'll say it's the opportunity to empower others to achieve their goals. And then he'll give you some other story, probably about some race that he's won, and there'll be some crazy story along with it. So I'm really looking forward to his segment. Marcus holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Temple University and a JD from the University of San Francisco, and now works as a corporate lawyer, in addition to developing the next generation of coxswains around the globe. So that's Marcus, and we're really lucky to have him. And then the other guy on your screen, he's the guy in Dutch orange. You might be asking, okay, is that just a guy who's wearing a really bright orange shirt and likes orange? Nope, that's Peter Wiersum. So Peter, he's now retired, but he was cox of the Dutch men's 8, and they won a bronze medal at the 2016 games. And he actually also previously coxed at the 2012 London Olympic Games and the Beijing, so that's 2008 Olympic Games. He's currently head coach of School Rowing Club in Amsterdam. I probably butchered that, Peter, so you'll have to correct me. And he coaches the Dutch under-23 men's team. Peter has years of experience developing coxswains, and one of his students has actually recently been selected to cox the Dutch men's 8 for the Tokyo Olympics, so 2021 now. For some reason, he's found it beneficial to translate some of Marcus's work for Dutch coxswains. He's a coxswain with a level of racing that less than 5 coxswains in the planet have enjoyed. So the way that this is going to be structured is we have 3 kind of areas that we're going to talk to everyone about. Marcus is going to lead us off, and he's going to talk about experiential learning and education and how that relates to coxing. So Marcus, I'm going to let you take over for 8 to 10 minutes. And if anyone has questions, you can pop that, as Colleen said, into your Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them as we're going through. And then there's actually also a spot towards the end of the presentation when we can address any questions or answers. So feel free to pop those in, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So go ahead, Marcus.
Hey, everybody. Kristen, thank you for introducing me. Colleen as well. And Peter, thank you for being here. Just so you guys all know, I normally speak really, really, really fast. So I apologize. Feel free to ask any clarification questions, but I do try to slow down for you for these type of talks. But the first topic that I'd like to talk about, it's actually the number one topic, I think, or most important topic for me as a coxswain and oh my gosh, I can't talk today. Experiential learning.
That's fine.
But yeah, right. What is, that's like the fancy term of basically what I like to just say feedback loop. One of the biggest things, and I think the most important things for coxswains to do in order to develop and to learn, is to become students of the sport. And the example that I always like to start off with is that most coxswains and a bunch of people on the call here today, they'll sit there and they, hey, I show up to practice and I'm not getting any better. Well, if you show up to practice and that's all you do is you show up to practice and you're not getting better, well, chances are you're probably getting worse. Most people think that just showing up, you'll get better, and that learning is linear for coxing and coxing development. And I don't think that's the case. And so what happens is, so in experiential learning or these feedback loops, what we need to do is that we really need to make sure that we're ensuring that we're actually developing and that we're getting faster, we're getting better, and we're improving as coxswains. And I often link this to, a lot of us have been students before. Throughout the year, you take a history class. At the start of the year that you're gonna have the history final at the end of the year. So what do you do throughout the year? Well, you attend class. That's attending practice. But if you only attend class and that's all you do, you don't do anything else, you're gonna fail that final. So what else do we do? Okay, so what do? We take pop quizzes, or we test ourselves. We take practice quizzes. We take notes during class. We study those notes after class when we're not there. We read and research when we're offline, when we're not in that classroom. Well, experiential learning is the exact same thing, except most people don't realize that with coxing. Again, they expect to just show up, plop their butts in the seat, and to get better. And you'll notice that does not work. So for me, so in this feedback loop, one thing that I do whenever I want to work on anything in particular, I pick that thing that I want to work on, and then I literally start and I figure out how to fix that. Again, a lot of times we know what we want to fix. The biggest issue is, though, how are you going to fix it? When somebody just says, oh, like I need to work on my calls. Okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to work on my calls. Well, that's passive. You're not going to get better as a coxswain. You're being passive. Instead, one needs to say, okay, I always ask my coxswains, how are you going to work on those calls? What are you actually going to do? Just focusing on something, just working on something in itself doesn't work. So, for example, so we'll talk about calls because I know a lot of people, that's what we spend a lot of time doing. And I got a couple examples of when I really screwed and biffed up some calls, So in this feedback loop, there's basically sort of four sort of steps that you sort of need to be aware of. You have the experience, something that you do. You reflect, you observe what happened, what went right, what went wrong. The third step is kind of the abstract visual, make a plan. What can I do different? What can I change? How can I modify that? And then 4, you implement it. If you don't do all those 4 steps, very rarely will you make any improvements or you make any changes. So, for example, I like to I have a couple examples of calls that worked and calls that didn't work. And I often hear from a lot of the younger, more novice coxswains that they like to save calls for race day. Oh, the really big motivating calls for race day. And I like that I saw Peter's face kind of smile a little bit, because Peter will hopefully back me up on this one. If you're using a brand new call on race day that the athletes have never heard before, not only will it not be effective, normally it will actually take away and subtract from the boat. Because the athletes are literally sitting there thinking, wait, what the hell did he just say? And so anyway, so what happens is that we want to make sure that we practice these calls and we try these calls. The athletes know what's coming. They know what's being said, how it's going to be said, so that way they can react to that call the way that you planned, especially when you're dealing with 2, 4, or 8 people. So I have a couple examples of what things that worked and things that didn't work. So I remember one time in college, we're at this the Dad Val Regatta, which is like the largest collegiate race in the world or something. And, we were expected to win. We were looking really, really good. And one of the calls that our coaches used to always work with was, I want to lift the boat up out of the water, really pick it up out of the, when you get the boat going to speed, the boat really lifts up out of the water, right? Like really get it flying, really get it flying. And for some reason, barreling down the race course, 400 meters to go, we're just about starting our sprint, and I'm reiterating these calls that our coach does. But instead of just sort of like leaving it that, I was like, oh, let's get it flying. Let's really get it lifting out of here. Let's go like the USS Enterprise starship and take off. Like, what? I can remember the feeling of this boat as this stupid saying came out of my mouth. And we sort of finished the race. We ended up winning. It was actually only the semifinal. And I remember my athletes being like, okay, pretty much good job for the most part, but what the hell was that? That weird starship, that USS Enterprise starship call? Like, I don't know. I'm a sci-fi nerd. They're like, don't ever do that. Now, on the flip side, there's another call that I'll never forget. I was using with my guys on the U.S. squad at the head of the Charles. And at the time, in 2006, the movie, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, or Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby came out. So it's one of those Will Ferrell movies you've probably all seen. It's and one of the expressions that Will Ferrell and his, you're not an American, that they do is that like one of their pump up calls is shake and bake. It's reiterated.
Oh yeah, that one we've heard of. I think everybody's heard of shake and bake, surely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's a classic. That is. I haven't seen this, but I mean, we've all heard of shake and bake.
Yeah. So when I was trying to find ways to motivate my guys that fall for the head of the Charles, we were trying to find something sort of novel. Well, my guys really liked this movie. And at the time, also, we had a red boat. This Hudson, our lovely Canadian manufacturer, made this lovely red boat with these stars and stripes on it, very Americana and very kind of like Southern Texas-y type thing. And my guys just would not stop talking about sort of shake and bake. So kind of in this feedback loop, I was like, you know what, how can I use this? So, so I had the experience of trying a shake and bake call, reflecting and observing, second step, right? If I say it, what works? How does it work? How to implement it? Then the third part, of the feedback loop. Okay, like then I start asking the other rowers, well, what do they like how I say? How do I like that I say it? What's the best way to do it? And then 4, I'd re-implement it. And so what ended up happening is we ended up practicing this. And so this is sort of the fun, exciting thing. We practiced it several times. I mean, or sort of several times of practice for the course of, maybe a week or 2 leading up to it. And just the way that when we would come off our turns at the head of the Charles, we would always implement a move to get us back up to speed that we lost after the turn. So after the big weeks bridge turn, we decided to do the old shake and bake call. And what we ended up doing is that we sit there, we get around the turn, we're coming around the turn, we're coming around the turn, we're coming around the turn. I'm like, first just shake it. And then I go, now I'm straight. And then my 6th seat goes, then you bake it, screaming. And the whole boat just, on the next stroke, picks up. And, well, it obviously worked. We ended up winning the head of the Charles. It's like, I don't know, 3rd or 5th time I got to win the head of the Charles in the Champ 8. And we beat the unbelievable 8s or whatever the heck they're called, no big deal. But this was an example of something so silly and so simple and so stupid, frankly, but so effective because everyone was on the same page. We worked on this call together. It was something they were expecting. It was something that they needed and they knew. So for me, whenever I'm working with my guys or gals, I always make sure that I'm constantly doing this. And the same sort of feedback loop applies to everything that you do. Like even right now, I'm on this call and I'm taking down my notes of the different things that are being said and questions or whatever. I'll review these notes probably later, making sure I said or didn't say the right thing, or maybe I need to follow up and tell Kristen what I said that was wrong and yada, yada, yada. Or I can just criticize Peter later because that's what's fun to do. But what happens is that whether it's steering, whether it's interacting with your relationships with your coaches, interacting with your relationships with the other coxswains, interacting in your relationships with the other, with all your rowers, how you're saying calls, every aspect of your coxing and your improvement as a coxswain, one needs to make sure that they're a student of the sport. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. And you guys probably already see that. if you're just too fixated in just the moment, then rowing, you're never going to get better. But if you prepare properly, when you get into the boat, you can fixate not only in that moment, but on the things that you want to change. So, so for me, that's always been the case. And that said, sometimes I will give an example of that. One time I was at the 2011 World Championships, and I did make a call which was not prepared. And we were actually in the Cox pair, so it was the lead sled, as we like to call it. And it was Henrik Rummel, this guy from Harvard, and Troy Kepper, a Cal Berkeley grad. And we were not expected to win, but we go into the last 300 meters, and we're doing pretty well. I'm executing the race exactly as planned. I ended up, as I call our sprint, and we jump up on the Czech Republic, which is sort of the boat that was expected to win. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, now we're in the lead, I just go, you're doing it! Again, I had no idea why or where this came from. And for some reason, the boat picked up, and we ended up actually jumping out a little bit more just because the rowers were excited that I was excited and that we were sort of winning. But that's an exception to the rule. So I know that a lot of times people can say, well, sometimes you try new stuff and it works. That can be the case. But 99 times out of 100, you want to make sure that you practice, you try, you rehearse, and then you implement. Because if you do, you'll normally be pretty successful. So with that, I think that kind of wraps up the experiential learning, the feedback loop section for my talk. Unless somebody has anything else that they want to.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in really quick because you touched on that this is something that, you can work on in all areas of coxing. And so for me, I'm going to be working on steering until the day, like literally the day I die. Like I am not, a naturally talented steerer. And so, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit in my own talk, but I think, Marcus, you brought it up. You've got to make the action. So for me, let's say I'm focusing on my steering and then evaluate it, internalize it, and try to make it, evaluate what I'm going to do better the next time. So I think, it's not just with calls that you have to be focused on this. It's like everything, even just the way that you walk down the boat down to the dock or the way that you dock the boat, there's an opportunity to reflect and then implement next time you do it. And again, steering is a huge weakness for me. So it's something I've always got, and Marcus has been on top of me for this as well. So I think that's something just to note that, I think the feedback loop, it exists, in all facets of coxing.
It never really matters either. I mean, you can, I don't think anybody has ever reached perfection in any one aspect of coxing. That's the thing is, I can't even imagine, even, and assuming one of the things that I was more comfortable with, that even the last days of my coxing, I'd still, if I'm going down the river, I'd still just check afterwards, okay, was that turn like good or was it like spot on? And to get spot on, you've got to like go back on everything you do and think, okay, is there a way to do it better? I really think one of the hard things that coxswains have nowadays is that there are so many examples online that people sort of, you can get to copy so much, you know what I mean? There's so many Marcus is online on YouTube. I'm online on YouTube somewhere as well. Are you online, Kristen, or not?
No, not yet. I'm still active.
She's private.
Secrets, you're giving your secrets on the lock and key, aren't you? That's what you're doing. That's great, because I will say this, Marcus, the fact that your recording was available to me when I started coxing, that made me a coxswain who was able to beat you in later years.
One of my recordings is online. It's on the e-learning website.
That is true. That your recordings on the e-learning. But it's so difficult if you've got all these examples nowadays online to come up with your own style, to really question, okay, what is it that I want to actually do in coxing?
Well, and Peter, I think you hit the nail on the head too, because if I took Peter's recording and I basically said the exact same thing verbatim to one of my crews, and this is what a lot of people do, then they end up actually like, it's not effective, it doesn't work. Instead, I want to take one of Peter's recordings and then I want to digest it. I want to take it apart a little bit. What worked for him? Why was he doing what he was doing? What part of his recording could be useful and beneficial for mine? And that's what I will always go back to these questions. How, and how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? We've got to be specific. So I think that's what's sort of more important. So just listening to recordings in itself doesn't sort of make one any better. But if I
Yeah.
listen to it and I really digest it and I extract out what works for me or what will work for my crews or won't work for my crews, that's
Yeah,
the
not
only
just
way you're going to take that.
recording and say, "Wow, that guy's got a magical call. Then that must be the one to go for." I remember cycling down a river in Holland, and then like hearing myself coming by in a different boat, and I was like, "That's not authentic, mate. That's just you just copying my recording and your crew. That's never going to work."
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just keeping an eye on time. So I'm going to move us along now to Peter. And Peter's going to talk to us a little bit about coxswain selection. And I think this is important because in Canada, we're a pretty big country, but I think there's not a ton of sharing about how coaches always select coxswains. So we're going to get to hear from somebody who has, had to select under 23 coxswains, has helped, a senior national team member get selected themselves, and has actually run through coxswain selection himself as an athlete as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter now, and then after Peter, we can start to answer some questions.
Yeah, this is of course a topic for which, let's be honest, there's going to be no easy answer for this one because it's always going to be vague, it's always going to be opaque, and I can speak to what I stick to as a coach, or at least what I try to stick to as a coach. As Kristen said, I just this weekend selected the coxswain for the Dutch U23 U23A. And I think when we're talking about, you've got to somehow digest selection into like categories. Okay, I think somehow that's the only way to do this fairly and to do it well. And I'm sure that other coaches have their own methods, and I'm sure that they also find a way to do it fairly and well. But for what works for me is to sort of digest into categories. And if we're going to talk about, okay, how can we sort of like separate all the many facets of coxswain into categories? I remember once hearing in an interview of one of Marcus's colleagues from the US Women's 8. The interview said, "Okay, what's your job as a coxswain?" And Mary Whipple said, "My job as a coxswain is to show up to the start on time, steer a straight course, help the gals have a good piece, and don't say stop before I pass the finish line." And to me, that pretty much in a light-hearted way, it sums it all up. Okay, it really, I mean, it says show up to the start on time. You're running stuff. Okay, coxswain is not being a leader. That's wrong. Coxswain is being very capable at executing a plan that the crew with the coach or the coach has come up with. You've got to be able to execute, you've got to be able to manage things, you've got to be able to run things. And there are people skills that come into that as well that you've got to look out for. Steer a straight course. I mean, Kristen, you said it, but I mean, if there's no amount of push send, there's just no amount of push send that can compensate for zigzagging down a 2K course. It's just never going to happen. Steering a straight and a fast course, that's just like that's fundamental. And then you got to help your crew to have a good piece, and that's basically summed up into three main things. There's your job summed up right there. And we're looking for other things. We're looking for people that are sort of pleasant people in groups. We're looking for good teammates. We're looking for people who are meticulous and well organized, that kind of stuff. I think every coach ranks these aspects differently. I rank them equally. I rank managing to execute and organize things just as highly as I rank being able to race with your crew, because that's it. You've got to be a racer. A coxswain has to have a natural racing instinct. You've got to want to race with your crew. Just as I rank steering fast and straight, I rank them all equally highly. But I rank steering fast and straight a little more equally than the other two, to quote George Orwell. That's just the one I go for, and I work a lot with novice coxswains. So in Amsterdam, I normally get 15 to 20 walk-ons every year who show up for coxswain who've never seen the interior of a boat ever before. And I'm not listening to the recordings when they step into a shell for the first time. I'm just seeing if they can handle the river, if they can handle traffic, if they can handle running practice, and if they enjoy the thrill of pieces. And if they've got those aspects, I know that I can teach them to coach. I could teach them to motivate. I know they've probably got boat feel. I know they can handle stress and chaos. If they can handle traffic on a busy river, then we're pretty much good to go. Then we're pretty much the rest can be trained. And then, one thing I'm not talking about, as you can hear, is weight, because again, I very much doubt if a couple pounds can lose out to a wonky course down the strip, down a 2K. I'm really very clear about that.
So Peter, we've actually got a question I'm just going to touch on from the audience. So I'm going to read it for everybody, and then I'll have you answer it because you did touch on it. The question is, please advise on how to recruit people to become coxswains in a novice program. Our club has been sculling for many years and are coming into 3 cox boats and need to find people to learn this role. So maybe you could touch on just a little bit on how, in Holland, obviously there's a very, very vibrant rowing scene, especially where you are in Amsterdam. I mean, you've got, anytime I go there, I see just about 1 million eights on the river or on the canal. And, obviously you need coxswains for those eights. So what are some best practices you've come up with? I mean, obviously you're at one of the main clubs in Holland as well. I shouldn't say that if there's any Dutch listeners that aren't from school, but.
No, it is the main club in Holland.
The main club.
Out like a league of its own.
Yeah, so maybe you could touch on, what are some best practices for the novice side, how to recruit people into that role?
I'll be very frank here. My coxswains do the recruiting for me. No, but they're really great. I've got this little group of this hardcore of coxswains been doing it for a couple of years, and they go out there and they find people whom they have a good time with and say, hey, how about you come round to an evening with the coxswains? We'll have a couple of glasses of wine, which of course is allowed in Holland, which is not allowed in America, as we all know. And they have a couple of glasses of wine, they have a good time. Say, hey, how about you come onto a boat one of these days? Oh, I've never rowed before. No, you'll see, it's loads of fun. And my coxswains do it for me, and they're really great. And I've got this, and they've got their Twittergram and their whatever it is, and they're really big on their and they're fantastic. I recognize it is very difficult to find people who love it. I found sailors often like to do it in the winter. Maybe that can help for this question, trying to find sailors who want to do it. I found obviously kids of parents, little kid brothers, kid sisters have often done it very well. But generally, I mean, it's rowing. What coxing does is it makes rowing appealing to such a broad public. Because I mean, look at Marcus. I mean, just look at the guy. He's not the specimen of an athlete. I mean, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but rowing means that Marcus can go to the Olympics. I mean, how great is that? I mean, I hate sports, and I got to go 3 times. I mean, that's just how great it is.
I wanted to follow up on something you said, Peter, or actually kind of something you both said. The one thing that you basically said, being a good coxswain, and you gave a very short, you gave the Mary Whipple example, something, we don't want a whole lot of things. I don't think that can be overemphasized enough. Most coxswains that I have worked with or have seen or I develop cannot follow instructions. And if your chances are, it's mind-blowing, especially a lot of some junior coxswains, some collegiate level coxswains. And I'm talking, and what happens is, because that shows that you can follow directions. And I'm talking from all these little things. If coaches say keep the boats level and you don't keep the boats level, you're not following instructions, which means either you're incompetent or you think they're stupid and you don't want to listen to them. Right? Well, if you're not following my instructions, and we're talking being late or early to a practice starting line, and because most of what we're doing is during practice, right? We go all year long. We only race 3, 4, 5 times a year, but we're practicing hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, hundreds of thousands of hours a year. But we only race for 30 minutes out of the year. And so with me, coxswains do self-select themselves simply because they can't follow instructions. And this goes into, and I think we had a lovely question from a lovely woman named Kelsey from Palo Alto. She said, how do you develop from, what was the question? From,
national team, coxing to
national team. And what I actually, and what I do is actually, what I see all these people do is that humility, actually. Peter might laugh at me when I use the word humility, but because I don't consider myself a very humble person. But what happens is when I make the national team or go to the national team, I'm not trying to prove to everybody how good I am. I'm not trying to show other coxswains how much better I am than they are. Instead, I try to show how much I can learn, how malleable I am, and that I'm following and executing the coach's instructions as they see fit. If you do that, you're in the top boat. The amount of coxswains I've worked with on the junior US team that went from 5th level coxswain as they're going into their senior year to getting invited to the junior national team and making the junior national team 8 in only 8 months. And through very, 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 I'm not that good of a coach. Very little work was done on my part. It was just highlighting to them, stop this macho crap. Stop, because what happens is whenever that happens, you normally overdo it. You miss deadlines. You're not keeping the boats level because you want to be in the lead. Well, the coach said keep the boats level. So all this ego stuff is normally what I think prevents coxswains from getting better and develop them and really going to the next level, or even just making a top boat.
Let's not forget. I mean, for the three of us sitting here, I mean, we've been incredibly. We've had talent, obviously, and we've worked at it, obviously, but we've been incredibly lucky. We've been lucky because we were born in a country which had an 8. We were lucky because we had that at that time. The country's 8 was fast, so we got to perform. We've been very, very lucky. So I mean, the first answer to the question, how do you make the national team, is we had sheer blind luck. I mean, and humility, obviously, as Marcus says, obviously humility, but I mean, right place, right time plays a really big part. I think that it's more about how can you reach that level, and there again, luck plays a part, because you've got to be at a program which creates an environment where people where there's the knowledge to improve. I mean, I remember you must remember this too, Mark. Remember, like, back in the olden days, okay, so Marcus and I are in our 30s, obviously. Back in the olden days, Marcus, but like 2005, 6, they used to have like these big old video cassettes that used to go the rounds of the rowing clubs. Do you remember that? Like there'd be like one video cassette which had a recording from like a coxswain seat. That was the one, and you, like, if you were lucky, you got to borrow it that one year to look at your club with your coxswains. Do you remember that? I mean, that wasn't even that long ago. So somebody has a really interesting question here, Mel Webb. Coxswain became extremely competitive and there is only one seat in the boat. What is the best advice in creating a culture within a program where coxswains want to share and collaborate with each other to elevate their skills? Kristen, do you want to delve into that?
No, I do actually, though, and I think it actually ties into this whole idea of humility and not needing to prove yourself for the sake of proving yourself, but just trying to be the best that you can for yourself, and then trusting that if you're the best, you're going to make the boat. And I want to touch on this because it actually ties in with that question about post national team. And this was my biggest learning when I was trying to make my first national team boat, was I just needed to execute. I needed to stop listening to all the jazz in my head about, trying to look better, and I think when I stopped focusing on just trying to beat people, then I focused on my own performance. And so it was like Marcus said, like, just focusing on getting your boat to the start line when coach says to be there. I think paying attention to that and listening to the coach and listening to the rowers is something that I wasn't doing before the national team, if I'm being totally honest. Like, I don't think I was good as a U23. I don't think I was good, my first year of senior stuff. Like, it really took me a long time to buy into listening to the athletes, listening to the coaches. And it's as Peter said too, I was really lucky that the opportunity existed for me. So I think I got away with being kind of mediocre for a long time because I quite simply wasn't listening. And I know it sounds simple, but it just, like, that was like my aha moment when I started listening. It's not that complicated. So I think that really buys into culture. And I think it comes from the coach. I don't think it necessarily can just come from the coxswains, but the culture from the coach needs to be that of performance rather than games. And by that, I mean the coach needs to look like, I know there's a lot of coaches on this call, and the coach needs to look for coxswains that listen to what they ask to be done on the water. So is the coxswain executing drills? Is the coxswain, if the coach is saying, as Marcus said, level up the boats, and one person is just trying to sneak a bow ball in front, I mean, that's not helpful to anybody, especially clubs, especially high performance, even novice. Like, it's just not helpful to anybody to try to be getting an advantage when it's, not really supposed to be there. Sorry, Peter, jump in. I know you want to answer.
Yeah, there's also one thing. That's which is interesting, though, that strikes me with this question, is that is it always necessary to let coxswains compete against each other?
Yeah.
And because here's the thing. So sometimes the pecking order is clear, and we know that, like, coxswain number 2 will be coxswain number 1 next year because coxswain number 1 of this year is going to graduate and going to move on. is it absolutely necessary to put coxswain number one through the grind of selection for the sake of it, whereas coxswain number one could be busy working with coxswain number two instead of fighting coxswain number two? I know that that's probably, there's a Dutch expression here, swearing in a church. I know that for a webinar that's on the American continent, this is definitely probably swearing in a church. But I wonder about this endless,
I agree.
and obviously there's a spectrum. Okay, I'm not saying don't do it. I mean, just try to think about where you are on that spectrum. If you're rather extreme, or if being a little less extreme on that spectrum might work for you.
Well, Peter, I think what you're saying is actually spot on. And actually, this ties into Miss Allison Ray's question, which I did want to address real quick. It's like, how can coaches help develop these coxswains, right? And one of the things, and again, you don't want them competing against each other. The coxswains should not be thinking that they're competing against each other. The coxswains should be thinking that they're collaborative, that they are a unit that helps make the team faster. Whether you're the novice coxswain or the varsity coxswain, you have a role to play, and they need to be aware of that. One of the ways that I work with my coxswains when they're on the teams together is that I force them to work together. And one of the biggest things, especially if it's anything development-wise, I was one of our Ivy League coaches that we work with at our Sparks camp. She sat in on my, my week-long coxswain conferences before and tried to implement some of the stuff later. She is a rower herself, and she's like, I have no idea how to cox a boat. But what she did is that she started facilitating her coxswains getting developed better by assigning. So each week they had 1 hour where at first she started moderating it, and they would spend an hour just talking on what can they do as coxswains together collaboratively to help the whole team. She said within 15 minutes of the first 1 hour meeting, she was already out of her leg and no idea what was going on because the coxswains were talking about something. But she said even though she had no idea kind of what they were talking about or how they were talking about some of this stuff, the fact that they were doing it, the team got much faster, much quicker, and that the coxswains started working together so collaboratively, and then all the coxswains got better. Every single coxswain gets better when that happens. So, and also you need to let your coxswains know, if you're the top coxswain, you think you're the top coxswain and you're in the novice boat, you got to let your coxswain shut up. Maybe I'm in there because I need you to develop the novices. You shouldn't have to explain that to the coxswains. The coxswains should know that their role is to facilitate a good practice. They shouldn't be questioning where you're at. And I think this happens, so kind of like what Peter was saying, not by pitting them up against each other on the water, because all we know that does is just takes away from the speed of both boats. Mm-hmm. Instead, we have them more collaboratively everywhere we can, so that when they are on the water, they already have that collaborative relationship. When they have that collaborative relationship of making sure the boat practice is running smoothly, that frees up their mental energy to focus on their own skill set development. Similar to what Kristen was saying. You got to focus inward. It's not about the other half.
Yeah, and I mean, it really comes back to culture. Like it's actually really neat how these questions tie everything together, because that culture of being collaborative is really set by the coaches. And I want to stress that to the coaches on this call who maybe don't have as much experience coaching coxswains. It's about, as Marcus said, make your coxswains or encourage your coxswains to work together, because it's just going to make your program faster. It's, as Marcus said, it's going to make them develop their own skill set. And I can speak from experience. This is so true. I've been in programs where I'm pitted against another coxswain, and I've been in programs where I'm encouraged to support another coxswain. And I can guarantee you that I feel better about myself when I'm actually collaborating with another coxswain versus being pitted another coxswain. And I find that my development is way stronger. Like I feel better when I'm lining up for races because I feel there's a village behind me that's helped me get there, including, whether I make the boat or not, other coxswains. So I think, that, and it really comes back to that. I really believe it comes back to culture. Okay, so I'm going to keep things going here just with an eye on time. We've got a lot of questions and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to talk now. Everybody shut up. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to talk now to you guys, and I'll keep it brief, but just on some best practices. I mean, I'm still in a boat. And so I'm always looking for ways to improve. So I'm going to talk to the webinar about ways that I try to improve. And this is for me, I'm in a program for between 2 and 4 years. This quadrennial, it's going to be 5 years, given that we've got an extra year. So I've got some best practices I'd like to share with everyone. And then I'm sure Marcus and Peter will both chime in. I think Peter definitely will chime in because he's got a little bit of different views on coxswain to athlete, or if a coxswain's even an athlete. So I'd like to hear his take on it. So
well, you guys don't know this, but Kristen is actually a real athlete.
I'm going to talk about that.
Kristen cycles super fast. Okay, you guys
Don't
know
steal
this.
my thunder. So the first thing that I look at is self-evaluation. It's the easiest thing to work on if you're in a program by yourself and you've got limited availability for mentorship or feedback. So the first thing I look at is steering. As I said at the beginning of this call, I'm bad at steering. It's something that I have to be really aware of and work on. Marcus will tell you. I mean, the first thing there's two things he works on with me, and one of them is steering. So and I know Peter will agree with me too. He said it, he ranks steering really highly when he's selecting coxswains. So it's something that you can, as a coxswain, even if you're a novice, you can work on really easily. And the way that I do that, I mean, rowing is a mundane, boring sport in that you're on the same body of water most days. You get to know the lake really well. You get to know your course really well. So you can evaluate your steering if it's a straight line based on, side to side movement, or if you're not on a straight line, let's say you're on a lake or a river where there's turns, how well you steer. So how much are you actually using the rudder to steer? Are you overcorrecting? For those of you in Victoria, I know there's some people that are from Victoria, BC on this call. We train on Elk Lake in British Columbia, and there's something called the island or point two, and nobody likes it. It's a really horrible thing. I can't tell you how many coaches and rowers have threatened to blow it up over the years. Marcus will like that. So anyways, when you're coming towards point two to the island, away from the channel, as we call it, so it's one stretch of water, you're having a great day as a coxswain if you don't have to stop and turn the boat. So that's how I evaluate my skill set with steering, is if I can get the 8 around the island without having to stop, I know that I've nailed it. And it's actually really fun for me because there's a precise point that I need to start steering, and I need to evaluate wind conditions, water conditions, strength of the boat. If I'm a really strong, fast moving 8, I'm going to have to take that into account. So that's one way that I self-evaluate to try and get better. And then the other part with steering is video. So I know coaches love video, and when they take the video from behind you, you can actually see if you're steering. So it becomes really apparent really quickly when everybody's looking at video and they turn to you and they say, "Oh, hey, Kit, why were you steering like that? Well, why is the boat going offset?" And that's pretty clear feedback right away. And that's something that I always pay attention to. Another thing that I use for self-evaluation is audio. And I know it's gotten really easy because you can just take your phone in the boat with you now and audio tape yourself. And I do it to this day. And I can't tell you how many times I've listened to my audio and I say to myself, "Oh my God, did I really just say that?" So I think having focus on what your calls are and being present to what you're doing is something that, if you're in a club for a long time, it's easy to kind of fall into bad habits, and audio is what helps me get out of those bad habits and self-evaluate. And then the last thing that I do is I keep a journal. And I know that Peter and Marcus will agree with me that writing things down is really important, because as the months, weeks, months, years progress, for me, it's about consistency. And I find that through different periods of the year, I kind of forget that I've had, a realization or a really good day. So if I've messed up or I've had kind of a bad day at practice, like maybe, I'm making calls that are, the technique is off and I'm just not connecting with my boat, I'll actually go back through a journal and look back to some of, the calls that have been working in the past and discuss with the athletes whether that would be a call that we could try, and then put that into, into practice. And I think I've got a few of my women on this call, so look for me to do that, because I think it's really important to, keep the journal and keep track of what you're working on. And that way, again, I'm pretty tough on myself, and I think I do kind of fall into this trap sometimes of paying attention to all the bad things that I'm doing, and so, or the things I want to improve on. So when I can go back and look at a journal, look at the things I'm good at, then I can bring those in and highlight those things. So the next thing I want to talk about is getting outside of your comfort zone. And I think this is a hard thing to do as a coxswain, because fear of failure is something that's really big, because, when we mess up, it's pretty apparent that we mess up, but it's something that getting outside of my comfort zone is when I learn the most. And I cannot stress that enough. So when I'm sweating buckets, when I'm, scared out of my mind or nervous, when I put myself out there and try to do something new, or different. Now, this isn't just relating to rowing. This is when I find I get my biggest learning. So every year since 2013, I go down to San Diego Crew Classic. This is actually how I met Marcus. Well, that's a long story, not for today. But I've been going down for the last 9 years now, and I cox a master's crew. And it's really important that I go do this because that weekend represents the first 3 2Ks, like 2K full out races that I'm going to cox of my race season. And in that weekend, I have to call a 2K race warm up. I have to call a race plan, and I have to do a variety of things relating to herding a bunch of masters men rowers, which they are the biggest group of people that will never listen to you. So it really makes me work for, you know, my role as a coxswain. And so I mess up every year. I mean, it's a 2K race warm-up is all about timing. Calling and executing a race plan is, you know, also about timing under, you know, and you're under a lot of pressure. And so this allows me, this experience is what allows me to, you know, kind of shake off my jitters, you know, shake off the dust from the previous year and get, you know, 3 full out 2Ks under my belt. So coxswains, any 2K start, anytime you can get into a boat with different people, you're going to learn something every single time.
That's fundamental, isn't it? These coxswains that are only prepared to cox the varsity 8s, they're just missing so many great chances. I mean, the local Masters 8, there's your opportunity to improve.
Yeah.
The old podgers that are going to whine, those are the ones you want to cox.
Yeah, definitely, because they're just gonna say it straight to you. Like as I said before, like there's, you know, in Masters men's 8s, like Marcus, I know you know this too, like there's a lot of voices and they've all got an opinion, and somehow the more years they're away from the national team, the opinions get greater. So
I try it as often as I can. I haven't in a while, but Carnegie Lake Rowing in Princeton and Marin Rowing. And I refuse to cox the fast young men. They always try to put me in. Instead, I try to do the Z category, which is women are in their 70s. They're all named Marge for some reason. I swear, they're all named Marge, and they're all like they're there to work out and they have fun. And with them, I'm not gonna lie, I also cheat. I always make sure I'm up and I start up and I jump to start, all that stuff. But that's because Marge likes it, you know. But you learn so much. I really do. I learned so much because it forces me to streamline. You know, if I often always put my varsity coxswains in novice boats because, you know, if I'm able to if the varsity coxswain has overly complicated technical calls for only his crew, they're not as good. If you have universal calls, and this is something I've worked and talked to Peter about, that Peter coxes in multiple languages. If he can talk clear, clean, concisely.
Yeah, it works. I've coxed like American crews in Dutch, but somehow you can just like not obviously races, but you're coxing like an American crew. You're coxing like I used to cox the grade 8 ahead of the Charles, going down the course, coxing. You say, guys, do you want to see how this works in Dutch? You call it in Dutch, they do it. It works. I mean, people can understand so much by intonation and all the rest of it. Because there's a really good question here from somebody saying, how do you feel comfortable when you're the least experienced person in the boat, and how do you feel confident? How do you sound confident as a cox? Which I think comes back to exactly to what Marcus says. I mean, it's you do your job. You do your job. Don't need to make it more complicated than it is. I mean, that's what you're saying, isn't it, Marcus? Just sit there, do your job, steer a boat, steer a fast, straight course. Don't say anything you don't know.
You do it well.
Just say what you do. Yeah, just say what you do know.
Yeah.
Which ties into one of these other questions we have is that, you know, how do you see what's going on in the boat and try to make those changes? Stop trying to make changes in this boat for the rowers. That's the coach. You can't see it. When I hear coxswains coaching like body posture and things that they can't see, I'm like, shut up. You can't see that, which means you're white noise because you can't see if they're doing it right. You can't see if you're doing it wrong. So you're just spewing it out. The only thing I really work at, I will talk about blade heights because I can see them and I can see if they make the change. Oh, hey, your blade's a little higher, a little lower. I don't know if it's because their shoulders are slouching or their hands or whatever. And afterwards, when I get off the water, maybe I can talk to them and work about it. But otherwise, you know, you don't try to do what you can't do. Don't try to, you know, say to things that you don't know anything about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to touch on something because I do want to, you know, get Marcus and Peter involved in it. It's, you know, one of the other ways that I get myself out of my comfort zone is feedback. And I think it's something that's difficult, you know, to put yourself out there, but I think it's really important. And one of my biggest learnings was actually, I get to work with a coxswain coach. And for me, it's a game changer because I think my coaches, and if they're on this call, I'm sorry, national team coaches, I apologize, but my national team coaches are not coxswains. They're coaches that were rowers. And so a coxswain coach is somebody who has done what you're trying to do, and they get it. And I mean, it was a really big step for me to get a coxswain coach, because my coxswain coach knows what's going through my head, and he calls me out and he asks the tough questions. And asking those tough questions, like literally saying them out loud, is something that I wasn't prepared to do for myself. So you may not have access to a coxswain coach, but you can ask, you know, coxswains, myself included, you know, for help or ask questions outside of this call. And I want to bring up that, you know, so Peter and Marcus have actually, and myself, and Terry Paul, everyone knows Terry Paul from Rowing Canada. He's a bit of a famous guy. We've all contributed to this, this e-learning platform, and it's really innovative. And what it does is it gives people access to, you know, wisdom and knowledge that, you know, we've gleaned over the years, and you've got access to this learning. So coxing isn't this mystery. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I mean, you guys can everyone can hear it from Marcus and Peter. I mean, they've had to work their butts off, find interesting ways and innovative ways to find knowledge. And you know, everything they're saying, you know, I'm making notes and everything, but, you know, e-learning, I think, is kind of the next step in coxswain development. Yeah, but e-learning is, yeah, I think it's the next step in coxswain development. I mean, we live in this age of technology. We live in this age of COVID. So, I mean, myself, I don't think I'm going to be on the water still for a while. I know the Dutch team is back on the water, but, you know, in North America, we're probably not going to be doing our jobs for a very long time, but that doesn't mean that we cannot get better. We can get better. Like, so much learning happens outside of the boat. And I know there's a question about the e-learning. Did you guys want to touch on that at all?
Marcus, you want to take this one?
No, I mean, I guess, you know,
the Americans should do the yeah, this is where
yeah,
you
I mean, we started Sparks Consulting, and specifically the coxswain education program, or wing of the thing, you know, shoot, almost 6 years ago now. And because, you know, you're not alone. Every coxswain's like, oh, I don't have a coxswain coach. I'm not getting help. Well, yeah, you're not alone.
Did you find yourself a coxswain coach? Who was it?
Well, I mean, I worked with Pete Chipolo.
He's not going to say on this call.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I did the same thing. I found the coxswain for the Sydney Olympics. I needed a coxswain coach as well.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, well, it's different for me. No, it's the same for you. Whether you're this high school program or that master's program, the other coxswains aren't getting any help either. But I wanted to follow up on something that Kristen said. So one of the things I also often hear coxswains say, hey, how do you think I did? And what's the answer you always get? Everyone that's up, what do you get? You did fine. That's a stupid question. They say there's no such thing as stupid questions. No, there are. And stupid people normally ask stupid questions. That's a stupid question because you already know the answer to it. If it's something that you already know the answer to, it's stupid. You did do fine. You know that's how they're going to answer. That's not the right question. The question is, when I made this call, was that effective? When we did this route of course, did you like that or not like that? When I was critiquing your technique and reminding you about something the coach was working on, did you like it that way or did you want it a different way? That is a good question. That's how you get the feedback. That, again, it's just and I just get so angry at this sort of millennial generation because it's like, oh, like everyone's just so, I don't know, but it's just like they just love asking these like, oh, hey, I want to get recruited to college. Like, oh, I'm a really good coxswain. Let me know if you want to hear from me. What? A college coach is not going to respond to that and say, hey, what's going on at your program? It doesn't matter what it is. You have to engage if you want to solicit the information you need to help yourself get better.
Yeah. Now, I think that what Kristen talks about is very important. That we have collaborated together in the past. So Kristen, Marcus, and I, we all. Yeah, we go way back. I think we go back for this time to a camp in Tampa in 2015, Kristen.
Yeah. The
three of us together. Yeah, and Marcus, I remember from Beijing, showing up my first day in China, and that was Marcus who came up to bounced up to say hi. But we've been collaborating a lot, and really enjoyed we always really enjoy doing these things together, like we're doing this evening. So with Kristen and Marcus again together this evening, we have worked together as well and trying to provide something that can be found online, which is the Sparks e-learning. Sorry, Marcus.
And so what's so interesting is that Kristen is Canada, Peter's Netherlands, I'm the United States, but we've got all these other coxswains around the world that we talk to. Marty Radjohn's in Australia, the different all the different Peters in the Eastern Bloc countries. They one of the things is that we are all very similar mindset. So while our styles are different, our approaches are a little bit different, the philosophies are kind of the same. And what's so amazing is that it's so opposite of where I see where people coming into the sport. People come into the sport, they think of a coxswain as this big rah, yelly, whatever guy. And so much of our coxswain development is not specifically saying, hey, here's exactly how you steer. Because in a different boat, different equipment, different rowers, different conditions, you need to steer differently. This is exactly the magic call, like Peter said earlier. There is no magic call. Different crew, different boats, different words, different languages. You need to figure out what works for that crew. Again, this is the difference. This isn't like a book where you can just learn all the freaking codes and lines. This is something that it's a how you think, it's how you approach. That's what's important. That's how you develop as a coxswain. And that's what we did at Sparks. When we bring our coxswains in, I always say, do I think you can get better, that much better in 1 week as a coxswain? Not really at our camp. You can't. That's baloney. So all these come to our camp, you'll get better. You won't. But I think we do. We change the way that people think. And that allows them to get better when they get home with their own tools in front of them. So that's what we did at Sparks Consulting. We've got our camps. We've got our new e-series. I think it's pretty dope. And I think you should check it out if you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcus. So I've had an alert that we need to wrap things up. So I'm gonna start wrapping that up. So I just want to thank everybody, who's joined us today. And I want to also thank Rowing Canada Aviron for providing the opportunity to host a session like this. I think it's probably one of the first times we've had, a webinar like, on coxing, or just like an open conversation. So I'm really appreciative for the opportunity. I know we have a huge variety of participants from all over the world, so thank you for joining us. I want to say a special thank you to Peter, who, as we said, joined us from Holland. So it's almost bedtime for him, and Marcus, who's in the on the West Coast in the U.S. Today, we've touched on some of the knowledge that, we've learned in our years of grinding away as coxswains. And it's been really hard to get better as a coxswain without help. And I think that's why the three of us have contributed, as we said, to build this comprehensive coxswain e-learning platform. And it's my belief, this is my personal belief, I can't speak for Marcus or Peter, but coxswain education should not be a mysterious black hole. And I think in Canada, we've got a long way to go. Personally, I found it excruciatingly, like it's really hard to find mentors and opportunities for development, but I don't think it needs to be this way. So personally, I really believe in it, and I would really recommend checking out the Sparks e-learning platform. I think it's innovative and groundbreaking, and it's a way to learn from people like Marcus and Peter and myself, who at this point, realistically, we have spent most of our lives gaining knowledge and experience in the sport. So again, thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Rowing Canada, for having us. I don't know if Marcus, Peter, you guys want to say anything, but I'm just really excited. I mean, I hope we have other, similar webinars at some point, because I think this is a step for helping coxswains across Canada, across the world, but it's just a step.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Canada, for having us. Love you guys, our friendly neighbors to the north. You're the best. Love your maple syrup.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot. It was good fun talking to you all.
There's nothing else I can add. I wouldn't be able to get a word in anyway. But you did a great job. We could keep going. We're up to an hour now. But I please, all the participants, we will be sending you feedback, and please give comments and anything you would like in the future. I'd love to do this again. And I appreciate the collaboration and your time from around the world and helping Canadians and all of this. So thanks for all your preparation, and thanks for everybody being on the call today. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.